The air in 1942 tasted like metal and ration sugar. Freight cars rattled through the night with the nervous clatter of dice on a wooden table, and every diner's window glowed the way a fuse glows just before it burns through. Newspapers were full of names that sounded like thunder: Guadalcanal, Stalingrad, Alamein. In Washington, a quieter name signed the checks that kept the lights on: Henry Morgenthau Junior. He was the man behind the curtain at the United States Treasury, and he knew the war would be won not only by steel and fuel, but by something more fragile and more terrifying: trust. Trust is a currency you mint in the dark. Franklin Roosevelt's administration learned that during the bank panics a decade earlier, when a calm voice on the radio stilled lines outside vaults. Now, the government needed not just to hold confidence, but to harvest it. The army would need rifles and rations. The Navy would need ships that drank oil like thirsty horses. The Army Air Forces would need factories that did not sleep. And all of it would need money. Mountains of it. The kind of money that turns a nation's pocket change into an engine. The instrument was called a Series E, United States Savings Bond. A plain slip of paper that whispered a promise. You could buy one for $18.75, and in 10 years, it would be worth $25. Small enough to fold into a wallet, large enough to steady a conscience. These would come to be known simply as war bonds, and they were less a financial product than a national ritual. They were the quiet handshake between a citizen's future and a soldier's present. The war bond was simple arithmetic, wrapped in complicated psychology. Instead of paying interest every 6 months, the bond fattened in silence. You tucked it away like a photograph of your child and forgot it until it surprised you with time's kindness. Behavioral economists would later give the trick formal names: loss aversion, present bias, commitment device. But the wartime marketers had already found a more practical phrase: pay yourself tomorrow by promising something today. The Treasury's second trick was more audacious. It was called the payroll savings plan. A clerk at a shipyard in Newport News, a machinist at Boeing in Seattle, a riveter at Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan could sign a card, and each payday a few dollars were peeled from the check before it ever hit a pocket. The idea was not to encourage generosity, but to domesticate it. Turn sacrifice into a habit the way a cafeteria turns hunger into a line. Psychologists like Kurt Lewin were teaching that small environmental nudges change behavior better than grand speeches. Morgenthau's staff listened. They wanted 10% of every pay envelope to harden into bonds. They wanted to build an army of purchasers, not collectors of slogans. Factories that reached high participation rates received treasury flags, blue fields stitched with white stars, hung above doors the way a church hangs a banner in Advent. The flags were proof to workers that they were not alone in their quiet giving. Social proof before anyone coined the phrase. In canteens and break rooms, posters multiplied like ivy. Norman Rockwell's Four Freedoms toured department stores and civic halls, a traveling catechism in oils. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. People stood in their Sunday coats to see them, then stood in longer lines to buy bonds, which is to say, they bought a future they could point to. Those tours raised over $132 million for the war effort, and every signature on every bond made a sound like a lock sliding shut. The numbers make a kind of low hum if you sit with them long enough. By the end of the war, more than 85 million Americans owned a piece of the debt that purchased victory. A population of 140 million, and well over half, chose to tie their savings to the fate of ships they would never see and men they would never meet. In a few relentless years, the bond program raised more than $185 billion in a country that had known breadlines a decade earlier. That was a cathedral built of nickels. The war loan drives were the liturgy that structured this giving. 8 great national campaigns that ran like tides between 1942 and 1945. Hollywood lent its lights. Bing Crosby and Kate Smith turned microphones into recruiting stations. Bankers joined committees. Boy Scouts hawked stamps in grocery aisles. The drives were quotas and pageants, parades, and stern arithmetic. The War Finance Committee issued goals for counties and cities. A hardware store in Ohio would have a Target number and a poster in the window that did not smile. The pressure was polite, which is to say, it was relentless. Civic pride was a lever. No town wanted to be the one whose bar on the chart never reached the flag at the top. Walk into a plant at shift change, and the money moved like a current. At Bethlehem Steel, at US Steel, at Douglas Aircraft, foremen lined up crews beside punch clocks and explained that an automatic deduction was not a hardship, it was a habit. The genius of the payroll plan was its impersonality. The purchase happened before temptation could speak. A worker never missed what was never seen. The bond book thickened one page at a time. A future accumulated in the tidy silence of a drawer. At home, mothers scotch-taped stamps into booklets while a pot of ration coffee simmered. Children learned to paste and count, practicing a simple calculus of later. $18.75 became $25. Then many such pages filled, sprouts in a row. The household ledger took on a different color. You did not have to be a speculator to participate. You did not even need to be patient. The structure of the savings did the patience for you. The war itself was a daily account statement, written in telegrams. A destroyer escorting convoys from Halifax to Liverpool cost more than 1,000 milk routes, yet it protected milk on a scale no grocer could imagine. A B-24 rolling out under the arched ribcage of a California plant carried a price closer to myth than pay stub, yet when it lifted into the marine haze, all the small deductions under all the nation's skylights seemed to lean upward with it. This is what finance looks like when it is not a casino. Inputs and outputs, steel and signatures, a nation's patience refined into kinetic force. Of course, the program had critics. Some economists muttered that the yields were modest. Some businessmen bristled at the quotas. A bond purchased was money not spent at a register. Wartime inflation wanted feeding, and the bond program, together with rationing and higher taxes, was meant to starve it. It worked unevenly, but it worked. Prices rose, but not like a brush fire. More importantly, the bond program sifted consumption into investment. It taught a generation that delayed gratification is an engine, not a sermon. When the soldiers came home and the factories downshifted, those bond books opened like hives in summer. Savings poured into marriages and laundromats, colleges and corner lots. The habit of setting aside a slice of income did not end with victory parades. It married itself to mortgages, to GI Bill tuition, to the quiet purchase of a secondhand truck that would soon be a fleet. The advertising apparatus was both gaudy and careful. The War Advertising Council, a coalition of agencies and their clients, donated talent and media with a zeal usually reserved for new soap. Magazine spreads, radio dramas, newsreels that ran before the feature film. Yet look closer. Most of that persuasion leaned less on the thrill of battle than on the slow dignity of thrift. A poster might show a soldier's face and a headline that felt like an order, but the copy beneath it was often a household budget hidden in a flag. If you want to understand how the bond program worked at the level of the skull, study a pay window on a Friday. The first time a worker signs the payroll card, he feels a pinch. The second time, he notices less. By the third time, the deduction is a bend in the hallway. The habit crystallizes. In the language of psychologists, the cue is payday. The routine is automatic purchase. The reward is not only the bond's future value, but the immediate warmth of belonging. Factories that hit participation targets held ceremonies, certificates were handed out with handshakes and Polaroids, behavioral reinforcement before anyone diagrammed it on a chalkboard. Celebrities were the glitter on top of the ledger book. Bette Davis on a platform in Oklahoma, voice like a bell. Bob Hope cracking jokes that ended in totals. Mickey Mouse on a poster, pointing a white glove toward the cashier's window. It could have been ridiculous. And sometimes it was. But most days, it was irresistible. People want to be part of something larger, and nothing is larger than a war that swallows continents. The miracle is not that the government asked. The miracle is that the country said yes in such numbers, and then kept saying yes until the job was done. By 1944, ownership of Series E bonds reached into nearly every neighborhood. From farmhouses in Iowa to apartments in the Bronx, even the smallest kitchens kept envelopes fattening in the dark. The bond was a talisman that protected you from your own worst instincts. Spend it now on a new radio, or let it turn into tuition later. Buy a better dress, or let it become a down payment on a better address. The bond said, hush and wait. It spoke softly, but it was stubborn. Men on the front saw the program through other eyes. A sergeant writing from the Solomon Islands filled out an allotment so that a slice of his pay would slide into bonds in his wife's name. He did not know what the bond would buy. He only knew that if he did not come home, tomorrow would need more than flowers. When he did come home, the bond became a set of tools, or a semester, or the difference between renting and owning. If he did not return, it became time and air for the living. There's another arithmetic the bond program captured, the arithmetic of legitimacy. Banks and brokers on Wall Street handled the big treasury issues, and they were well paid for it. But the Series E program pushed ownership down the staircase. We wanted the ownership of America to be in the hands of the American people, Morgenthau said. And it was not just a line. It was a reason to sleep at night. Debt owned by your neighbor is less likely to feel like a shackle and more likely to feel like a promise kept among friends. By the time the 8th and final drive, the victory loan, rolled through the country after VJ Day, the bond had become a character in the national family. Sometimes stingy, sometimes saintly, always patient. In the fluorescent light of a treasury office, clerks tallied subscriptions until columns blurred. Sums that once would have broken the spine of a budget now flowed like river water. The United States had financed a global war with taxes and borrowing, and the small bond was the most human piece of that machinery. It turned attention into action, and then turned action back into security. If you hold a surviving Series E bond today, the paper feels thin, almost indecently thin, given what it carried. Names are typed in meticulous capitals. The Treasury seal wears its solemn face. Look again, and you can almost see the fingerprints of whoever bought it at a window in a post office, where the fan squeaked and the clerk wore a tie too tight for summer. That person was not thinking like a hedge fund. They were thinking like a farmer. Plant, wait, harvest, repeat. War finance is often told as a story of central bankers and yield curves, and those pieces matter. But the deeper story is domestic. It is the way a government persuaded tens of millions to participate in a slow, repetitive act that was both private and public. A bond is a line of credit extended to the future, and the Series E program multiplied those lines across a nation until the future had no choice but to answer. When peace finally stretched its limbs, all that habit had to go somewhere. It went into the mutual funds that would later democratize markets. It went into savings accounts that made small businesses less fragile. It went into a cultural memory that whispered to children that putting a little away every payday is not a sacrifice. It is the price of admission to a life that does not go broke the first time the water heater quits. You can learn a lot about a nation from what it asks its citizens to do quietly. During the Second World War, the ask was simple: buy a piece of paper for less than it will be worth and do it again next month. The result was not just matériel stacked beside runways, although there was plenty of that. The result was a population trained in the arithmetic of later. A country of people who discovered, together, that patience can be a weapon, that thrift can be a form of power, and that a bond is sometimes the most dangerous thing you can hand an enemy, because it means you are not betting on panic, you are betting on time.